course, perhaps a better analogy would have been flattening or bombing the Catholic parts of Derry. We never did that, did we?
No, but we sent in troops. We had areas where we had famous mistakes by the British Army during the Northern Ireland Troubles. This is, however, not at all similar. However, this is not at all similar to the situation in Northern Ireland, and the precedent just doesn't work. The IRA were not an elected organisation, as Hamas claimed to be at the moment.
But they had massive support.
They didn't fire rockets into mainland Britain with the continuity that the Hamas did. The Hamas have effectively ministries in the Gaza. They have arms dumps in the Gaza. If we had been able to identify similar arms dumps in the IRA's times, if the IRA had the munitions that the Hamas do now, we would have done everything and anything similar to what Israel has done.
They killed more people. They killed one second, please. But they killed more people with massive atrocities on the British mainland than Hamas have managed with rockets over 10 years.
Hamas have killed hundreds of people through suicide bombings and sending in suicide bombs. This is why the security fence has been needed.
Well, the IRA killed thousands of people.
If I just may add, there is also just a fundamental misunderstanding about making the IRA comparison, which is the IRA never had as its charter obligations the annihilation of the British state. That is what Hamas is in its charter dedicated to, the annihilation of Israel, not the negotiation, not an issue over particular borders, but the annihilation of Israel. That's why it's sending rockets into main...
Zoe Williams.
Surely that is why Israel...
The point that Douglas is making here in terms of the question that was asked is that, are you going to compare the IRA to Hamas? They're both terrorist organizations, but remember, one is allegedly elected democratically, Hamas, supposedly, allegedly, where the others were just a terrorist organization. Also, as Douglas rightly points out, in their charter, the Hamas charter, their constitution, whatever you want to call it, they're just not calling for, we want land, we want this, we want that. They want the utter destruction of the Jewish state, the Jewish nation, the Jewish people, the complete eradication of them. That's not what the IRA were doing in terms of their demands. They didn't want the destruction of the British state. It's a totally different, scenario or whatever. Both terrorists, both evil entities, both perpetrating, attacks on civilians, no doubt about that, starting the whole situation. That is where the comparison ends. Anyways, let's continue with the rest of the debate. But before we do so, you're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, where I give you my political prescription, my political perspective on what's happening when, guess what, folks? Social media, people, religion, politics, everything just seems to collide, right? Let's go to the next clip and see what's in store. And this is the big question. This is from 2009, folks. This was back in 2009 on an attack that Israel did in response to rockets being fired in there, thousands of rockets being fired in Israel back in 2009. We're seeing the same thing now in 2013. Nothing has changed. But if you hear from some of these people, the stuff that they said should happen, never did happen, folks. And if it did, it would even be worse. Like Peter Hitchens talking. Anyways, let's continue.
And should be separating the Palestinian people from Hamas and not uniting them all under this indiscriminate bombing.
Mahmoud Abbas is not uniting with
we've got an aid worker here. You were in Gaza quite recently, weren't you?
I was there last January.
I just wonder what the opinion was then about Hamas in Gaza and what it would be now.
To be honest, the work we do at Islamic Relief, people we work with, they're less concerned now and then about the politics and the political posturing that goes on, and which leaves always inevitably, which we see it everywhere in Darfur. We work in Darfur, Afghanistan, everywhere. All this political posturing. There's people who suffer are the civilians, the poor people who have no say, who have no way of kind of making any representation to anybody about what they would like or what they want. They're the ones who are suffering. They're the ones who are victims to all of this. And this inhumane kind of posturing from all sides is something which is quite sad to see. And I was just on the phone to one of our colleagues. One of our colleagues just last night, and he said, "Look, I'm really glad that Israelis can hide in bunkers. Sadly for the Gazans, there are no such bunkers to hide in." He said, "I'm in the cellar of our house. and we can hear them outside now. This is how I said, we're all terrified, and we don't know if we're going to see the morning sun rise. So it's really quite a terrible situation for the Palestinians. The humanitarian situation was dire before this. Before this, before this recent campaign, many of the most respected NGOs were coming out saying, look, this is not tenable. You cannot continue as you are. 75% of people in Gaza continue to rely on handouts, food handouts. This is not a situation which
as
continues.
Gordon Brown said, they must... Well,
this gentleman here is doing I mean, these are, just entities going in, trying to just help the people there, putting their own lives at risk. So I give this gentleman and his organization a tremendous amount, of credit. Absolutely incredible and brave and moral and everything that they're doing, just trying to help. Like I said, is they don't have any political affiliation. They're just there to try to help the people that don't have a say-so. And unfortunately, when these things happen, it's the civilians, it's the poor people. So people always say, well, why don't they just rise up against Hamas, the Palestinians there, and take over? They don't have the guns, they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the means. They don't have food to eat for a majority of them. They're just thinking, how are they going to survive from day to day? How are they going to get food on their plates to feed their children? That's what's happening in Gaza. That's what's happening in the West Bank. Where are all the other Muslim countries? Where's Egypt? Where's Jordan? I know they've taken it, but not that many. They're closed their borders down completely. They're not allowing Palestinians from Gaza to get into Egypt. That's not happening there. You have to have international entities go inside there to try to help under the banner of the Red Cross or some other organization. And then they're putting their people at risk going into those areas. But remember, as I told you, folks, this is back in 2009. 14 years ago. Anyways, let's continue.
We'll get you in here. Gordon Brown said on the Andrew Marr programme a little bit earlier on, Israel must have security.
Well, on that subject, I think we can spend a lot of time talking about who's justified and who's not, but I don't think it's that type of situation. It's a long-term problem, and this is a short-term solution because violence only escalates violence. And I think...
that always gets a hand clap. Violence always gets violence. But what are you supposed to do when somebody attacks you? Just basically stay there and take it on both cheeks? It's easy to say. It's a nice sound bite, but it means absolutely nothing.
We've had this debate, but not once have we called it what it is. We talked about Islamism, we talked about Hamas, but we don't talk about Zionism. I mean, what is Zionism? Do we people know Zionism is a political ideology? It's not the same as Judaism. We need to separate the two. We also need to understand that to be anti-Israeli is not to be anti-Semitic. The two are totally, vastly different. They're not linked whatsoever. We also need to see the parallel between what happened in the Warsaw Ghetto and what's happening in Gaza today. I mean, that is the parallel we need to see. We need to understand.
Okay, last one on that. I saw people with placards at one of the demonstrations the other day saying, "Stop the Holocaust." How do you feel when you see posters like that, and when you hear, last word here on this, but when you hear comparisons like that?
Utterly despicable. There is a bottom line here, and that is plain and simple. If Gaza stopped firing rockets, Israel would pull out of Gaza.
So
that's what it comes down to. That is the bottom line.
What is the difference?
You're missing the point. If
you're missing the point.
Hamas stops firing its rockets into Israel, Israel would not be there in the first instance. Israel would leave there.
So therefore,
that's so true. I mean, again, who's starting this? It always goes back to, well, what happened in 1947? What happened back in the 1930s and the 40s? What happened with the creation of Israel? That shouldn't have been done. The United Nations had no, lawful way. It was lawful exercise to create this, the state of Israel. All of this stuff, it always goes back to, 75 years ago, 80 years ago, 90 years ago. It goes back thousands of years ago. This debate, it's not going to. You're not going to get rid of Israel. You're not going to, tell the Jewish people or pull them out from from where they're at right now. It's not going to happen. But it always goes back to that. Instead of basically saying, well, okay, look, talk about today. Why are you firing rockets? Why are you causing the terrorist activities to begin with? Why are you perpetrating these episodes of violence? which then causes retaliation, and usually in a disproportionately to the initial one that was done. But then proportionality, it's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, what's proportional? People say proportional would be equality. So what? You have equal amount of people that are killed, and then you can say, okay, fine, continue? No. But somebody starts it, somebody responds to it, and then everybody says, hey, the response is unproportionate. Look at what you're doing. And unfortunately, there's collateral damage which occurs in every time this thing happens. All the time.
To cease and
Israel
desist
get hold of
in its
82%
terrorist
of the land.
propaganda
When the
that you seem to
1947
subscribe
resolution
to,
gave it
and it needs to
67% of the
cease
land.
and desist its terrorist atrocities
Okay,
against
everyone,
Israel.
I'm going to have one sentence,
not be allowed
Peter
to get
Hitchens.
away with this. It is quite wrong to equate the deliberate extermination of European Jewry by Nazi Germany with anything that Israel has done. You know it's wrong. It's false propaganda, and you should be ashamed of it.
Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. I mean, I just wonder, you know, as a Jewish woman, obviously you have this emotional attachment to Israel, I'm sure. How do you feel at the moment about all this?
If I were God, I would ban religion. God's given us how many thousand years of trying to make the world work religiously, Rabbi? And we have failed. You are a Semite. I am a Semite. Why can't we live together? We are, in the Middle East, neighbours. Actually, my emotional loyalty is to the country I was born in, which is Britain. So what I feel about this is, if I were God right now, I would say, Hamas, God's not on your side. Jews, you're not chosen people. I chose humanity, and you have failed me. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to melt the ice caps. I'm going to cause the waters to rise, and I'm going to see whether that brings you together.
Is that why it's happening?
And oh yes, overpopulation, all this stuff going on.
Is this okay? Is this about religion?
This is not about religion. This is about a free, democratic nation fighting Islamist terrorist regime.
Hold on, Islamist.
Yes.
All right, and Israel is a Jewish state, is it not?
And it's a democratic Jewish state.
Yes, and there are all kinds of other differences, but the most important thing they have in common is they're all human beings and they need each other. Israel has so much to offer beside bombs. It has expertise, it has skills. If it exported its doctors, its irrigation experts, its scientists...
Israel has to defend itself when it
How
is
do you
being attacked
defend
like
yourself?
any nation.
You defend yourself politically. Politically.
So, do you not, as a liberal, take some pleasure from the fact that an Islam...
So over there, you defend yourself politically. So somebody's throwing bombs at you, somebody's firing bullets at you, and you basically set together and say, hey guys, we're not going to retaliate the same way, but let's get together our leaders, let's get, you know, the government together, let's get parliament, let's get our parties together, get out a piece of paper, some 8.5 by 11s, get your pens, that's how we're going to fight this. We're going to fight this with paper and pens and ink, and let's write down some policies, and let's see if that's going to stop the bullets and the bombs from whizzing by or dropping down upon us. That lady there in red, I mean, these are your kumbaya, you know, everything is going to be okay if we just got along, if we just shake hands, if we just give each other a nice, you know, hugsy-wugsy, everything will turn out all right. And unfortunately, the world and people don't work that way.
Islamist, a hardline, conservative Islamist organisation. We've heard what they're like, Hamas. We know what they're like. We know what their policies are. We know their attitudes to gays. We know their attitudes to women. Do you not take some pleasure in the fact that their command and control structure is being destroyed?
No. Look, I can't take anybody who could take any pleasure from any of this is completely sick in the head. I mean, the point is, what I'm hearing here is a lot of people arguing tit for tat about who's in the wrong and who's in the right, and that's fine at an individual level. A lot of people are very angry. A lot of people do feel very vengeful, but at a state level, you have to look strategically, and this isn't going to work strategically. And you know, you do have a moral responsibility at a state level to behave in a reasonable, not vengeful, but strategic way.
Douglas, very quickly. Douglas, I'm going to go to the audience. Douglas.
Another classic liberal response. Okay, you know, it's easy to say these words, honey. It is so easy, lady, to say these words, and they sound so good. But how come they're never backed up with, this is what I would do at a state level? If you think you're all that smart, and we're not all purporting to be that way, but when you make these statements out there that a state needs to be responsible, okay, what do you mean by that? Do you mean by that to say is that we would only be, if the statement is just a proportionate response, how do you do that? What are you going to do when the next time it happens? But to say just blindly that, you know what, the state has responsibility, it has to be nice, it has to do it does long-term thinking, but then what do you do in the short term when these incidents happen, when these terrorist attacks happen? What do you do then? You're not planning out 20 years from now. You've got to do, what are we going to do today, tomorrow, the next few hours, the next 24 hours? What do we do? Is there a way we can stop it from continuing short term?
What anyone in Britain would do if we had 6,000 missiles raining down on us and we had a sixth of our population living in bunkers.
Okay.
We wouldn't tolerate it, and nor should Israel.
What, would you tolerate that if we had these rockets raining down on us in this country? What would we expect our government to do?
Well, the rockets have been raining down on occupied Gaza, and they've been raining down on the West Bank. That's where the rockets have been raining down. It's an occupied country. Your man says that they're fighting an Islamic terrorist regime. I was in Nablus in 2002, and I saw the flattened police headquarters where they'd tried to fight the Israeli invasion with guns, and they'd brought in F-16 bombers that killed hundreds of Fatah, not Islamic terrorists, Fatah soldiers, and not soldiers even.
And they're, of course, the enemies of Hamas at the moment, and the internal struggle.
Now, the Israelis, it's all about the occupation and keeping the occupation of those lands. And when a few rockets, and I say a few rockets, come out, and
well,
during...
thousands, actually, thousands of rockets we're talking.
See this guy? Just a few rockets, maybe just a couple, just a few rockets. That's all that's happening. But what's coming back from the other side, oh, that's just unbelievable here. Forget about terrorist Hamas. It's all about the other side. Another liberal.
A 6 months ceasefire, none other than when the Israelis went in and killed 22 Palestinians were killed in Gaza during the occupation.
Okay.
230 died from lack of medical equipment.
What's your view? Very quickly.
Hamas seems to be rather cynical in that they're placing their rockets in the hospital courtyards in the middle of populated civilian areas. And so when Israel is bombing them, of course they're going to cause civilian casualties because they're targeting the rockets launch.
How can Hamas go on about complain about civilians being targeted when they have been targeting civilians for so long, and also when they are clearly holed up in civilian areas? A rocket hit a school in Beersheba in Israel the other day.
We have to take in mind that Hamas is a democratically elected party, and they are the government in Palestine. And targeting, Hamas is basically targeting the whole Palestinian people. What Israel has been doing recently is destroying the infrastructure of the Palestinian people, and not Hamas. The targets that Israel have bombed in recent days in Gaza, the majority of these targets are ministries of education, ministries of health, the clinics, the hospitals, the mosques, and including United Nations schools.
But of course, Peter Hitchens, you are so right. It's how it looks to the rest of the world, isn't it?
Well, it is, and this, as I say, this is the point where Israel is losing. And Mr. Murray, I think it is, was talking about the how would a British government respond? Well, Britain was under terrorist attack for many years by the Irish Republican Army, to whom we've now surrendered, as it happens, in the most shameful grovelling I've ever seen.
Okay, while
that was going on, we did not actually send our Air Force to bomb Dublin. And I don't think that it would have been considered a particularly sensible response. Effective response is one thing. Ineffective, politically blundering, flailing doesn't work.
During the trial.
Well, that certainly was fiery and feisty, right, folks? Douglas Murray, Hitchens, the other people out there, all giving their, give and take talking about the situation. What would happen if, this were happening in present day or even back in the day, and the IRA had been lobbing bombs onto Britain. And look what Britain's response was after the Berlin Blitz that was caused by the V2 rockets that were sent by Hitler. Look at was that a proportionate response or a disproportionate response? The night bombings of Dresden, Munich, Berlin, Dusseldorf, all these cities that were there. Thousands of civilians died. Would we be calling those terrorist attacks? Or is that just because that's what happens in war? Leave that question up to you. Anyways, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host, Dr. Nasir. If we've earned your subscription, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. Like, share, and follow us. You know what to do. Check out our other video links that are above and below. I'll leave you with my final thought, which is, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.